Pew, pew, pew. That was me shooting an asteroid down.
Finally.
Nice.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Hello and welcome to Science Sort of. This is episode 283, and our theme this week is definitely maybe. I am your host, Ryan, and joining me to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science for an old-fashioned episode, it's Viejo Abraham.
Aloha.
And Old Man Joe.
We're all gonna die. Maybe.
That is sort of the theme of this episode, but there's a maybe.
Yeah, but we already knew that.
That's fair.
So as we record this episode will come out in a few weeks' time, but as we record this, there's a lot of volcanic activity on the island of Hawaii. And so,
right.
newsflash. We're bringing in our volcanic correspondent with the USGS, Abe Padilla, to give us an update on what's happening in the state of Hawaii. Abe?
Yeah, so it's a pretty awesome little flank eruption taking place at Kīlauea. Well, at least it was.
Whoa, slow down. Define flank eruption. You've already lost me.
Awesome. Cool. So just a little bit of basic. Kīlauea volcano, it has a few different zones. So most people are probably familiar with the Kīlauea summit. That's the Halemaumau crater where the Volcanoes National Park Visitor Center is. So it overlooks the big crater. And so the actual entire area on that side of Kīlauea Island on the southeast is an active zone related to the magma flow through the crust. So a flank zone, just like you would think about a flank, as a side of this entire structure. So there's the east flank of Kīlauea. Obviously, the section to the east, which also happens to be a rift zone. So as magma comes up through the crust, starts building up pressure, and the crust expands and rifts apart to make room for the magma to come up through the crust. So the eastern rift section of Kīlauea at the moment is experiencing some higher activity than normal. So the eruption... it's in the Leilani Estates. It actually, as of 8 a.m. this morning, mostly paused. So there's no more active lava in the fissures. Obviously, there's still lava flows moving through the area since they've already come out of the fissures. But as of this morning, per the Hawaii Volcano Observatory run by the U.S. Geological Survey in Hawaii, the fissure system is currently paused. So overnight, last night, there were... slowing fissure emissions, but the sulfur dioxide does continue to come out. So that's something to keep in mind, is still degassing. And the eruption started, I believe it was May 3rd, shortly before 5 p.m. or so Hawaii time on Thursday, a week ago. The first fissure opened up. And fissures are these linear features that are very common in volcanoes, especially common in Hawaii. And it's basically a rift segment that starts to pull apart, creating a fissure by which the lava can escape. So as of this morning, there were a total of 15 different fissures that had opened up in the Leilani Estates area, totaling, I believe, about 2.5 miles or so. The length of the fissures combined covered about 2.5 miles. And one of the awesome things that we connected to, since we know this is coming from Kīlauea, there's actually been a subsidence of the lava lake at Kīlauea. It has dropped roughly 200 meters or so.
Subsidence just means drop.
Dropped. So it's... you can picture a lava lake. It's literally what it sounds. It's inside of the Kīlauea summit crater, Halemaumau, there is a lava lake, literally just bubbling around, moving around. And there are actually some really amazing videos of the lava lake being stirred up by the drawdown. So it looks pretty amazing. And so the lava lake dropping is literally just the surface starts to subside. It starts to go down because some of the lava is being diverted to other sections of the volcano structure and erupting out at the fissures in Leilani. So it's all interconnected. And yeah, so that's kind of a little quick update of what's been happening. A lot of really cool videos. Anybody that is interested in maybe getting a little bit more information or more details, there are two really fantastic resources that you can check, and we'll link to both of these on the show notes. But one of them, of course, the Hawaii Volcano Observatory. They are continuously monitoring everything that's happening at Kīlauea, and is run by the U.S. Geological Survey.
As you and I just learned recently, Hawaii does not have a state geological survey.
That's right. So it's the only state without a state geological survey. So it's run by the federal survey.
The logic being it's a volcanic state and a geologically active enough state that the USGS is always going to be interested. So they don't really need to divert resources to a state-run organization. There's plenty of USGS people on the ground doing the big work.
Right. We're already funding a pretty big operation through the federal system, and so that covers everything that we need. So you can go to the USGS page for the Hawaii Volcano Observatory. We'll put a link to that on the show notes. And then there's also a pretty active Twitter feed for the USGS Hazards Program. So you can tweet at USGS Volcanoes. They also do daily, if not, every few hours, updates. This is a little bit more general. They have, of course, a lot of information about Kīlauea, but also just volcanoes in general that are monitored by the USGS, which includes some of the other volcano observatories that we run, like the Alaska Volcanoes Observatory, Yellowstone Cascades Volcano Observatory. So yeah, check them out. Keep yourself up to date, and we hope that folks out in Hawaii are staying safe. And I truly feel for the loss of folks that have, been there and seen their homes and vehicles and property taken over by a very slow-moving but still, dangerous and amazing lava flow.
That poor Mustang.
I know, right?
Yeah, somebody I follow on Twitter, Callan Bentley, gets fascinated by this stuff, and he pointed out we can be in awe of the power of this event while still feeling sorry for the folks who are negatively affected. Like, the two are not mutually exclusive. So
yeah,
I think that's kind of the attitude we're coming from here.
Yeah, exactly. It just lends to the power of nature. It's such an amazing spectacle. And, we tend to think of volcanoes as being these if the big ones erupt, the ones that have pyroclastic flows, traveling at 100 miles per hour. They're dangerous and they're much quicker, but while you can outrun a lava flow, it's really hard to stop it. So they're also dangerous. And as the Hawaiian residents are experiencing, the amount of gas coming out of these types of volcanic systems can also be really, really hazardous for your health.
Sulfur dioxide, right?
Sulfur dioxide is, the dominant. And right now there's an alert in the state of Hawaii, for at least on the island of Hawaii, highly elevated levels of sulfur dioxide. And, it's a very real threat that can stick around. And one of the biggest dangers for eruptions like these, you don't know how long they're going to last. They can be days, they can be months. Kīlauea has had activity since the 1980s. So it could be decades. And that's a lot of toxic chemicals you're talking about coming out of a volcano system. So, yeah.
While I was watching the news forecast or news broadcast about the volcano, I was thinking about it in terms of I'm in California, in terms of wildfires that we have out here. But, the wildfires here, you can attempt to do something about them versus right. I mean, you can get the firefighters out and try to put them out or surround them. But with the volcanoes, it's just volcano's going to do what the volcano's going to do.
Yeah.
And just kind of got to let it happen, because that lava, we can't stop. It's just going to go wherever it feels like going.
But Joe, look up in the sky.
Oh, God, we're all going to die.
Is it an asteroid coming to kill us in 100 years? Maybe.
Maybe.
I mean, there'll definitely be an asteroid at some point. As Phil Plait likes to say, the odds of Earth getting hit by a large asteroid are 1. It's 100% probability that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Eventually.
At some point, we will get hit by a large asteroid again.
So what do we do?
Quick, somebody call the NASA Planetary Defense people.
Call Bruce
Are they
Willis
still around?
and Michael Bay.
So for our actual first story, Joe is going to tell us how NASA plans to drop the hammer.
Yeah.
Tell us, Joe.
Like Thor?
Like Thor, but more government-y in that Hammer is a
Thor's
giant
a
acronym.
regent of a realm.
That's fair.
He's a government official.
He is a government official. He's kind of like an ambassador, I guess.
No, Jane fought. Well, I'm not going to get into it. There was a Council of the Realms. We're not going to get into it. Thor did not sit on the Council of the Realms.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, anyway, hurtling through space at a high rate of speed, asteroids, big pieces of rock and metal and such. Anyway, there's one called Bennu that's out there, and it's kind of like sort of heading our way, but not really. As the NASA engineer who talked to the Washington Post about this, please don't print that an asteroid is going to crash into the Earth in the Washington Post.
I have to say, that's a really smart thing for him to have said. It made me laugh. I've dealt with one of the Washington Post science reporters, and she did a very good job, and I actually felt really good in how she wrote it up later. Mm-hmm. This isn't the same reporter, but I think that's a really smart thing for a scientist to say.
Yeah. And yet, the title of this article is, there's a small chance an asteroid will smack into Earth in 2135.
But as we've talked about, reporters often don't get to write their own headlines, unfortunately. Reporters usually, the section editor gets to write the headlines.
Gotcha. So anyway, the deal here is that NASA's working on a plan for asteroids, which is a good thing because eventually one is gonna head our way that we're gonna probably want to do something about. So NASA's come up with this program called HAMMER, which is an acronym for Hypervelocity Asteroid Mitigation Mission for Emergency Response. And what is it they say? Is it in Avengers where they're talking about somebody really wanted to make a good acronym? But
that's a pretty good one.
Well, SHIELD's a pretty clunky acronym.
Right. This one's kind of clunky too. But the deal is it's a study to figure out what you could do to mitigate the effects of an asteroid that's going to hit the Earth. Specifically, an asteroid large enough to basically wipe out most of life on the planet.
Well, in the world of Marvel Comics, Joe, there is a space-based version of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Sentient World Observation and Response Department, that is available. They're up there to monitor for alien threats, and their acronym is SWORD.
Nice.
Because there's already a guy named Hammer who's one of Tony Stark's rivals. It was in Iron Man 2.
Oh, yeah, okay. So they've picked this asteroid Bennu. It's out there. Apparently, it's around the size of the Empire State Building, which is a pretty good size. Big enough to send a big cloud of dust into the atmosphere, block out the sun, all that good stuff. And so they're looking into what they could do about it. And so one of the things that they're talking about doing is just sending something really heavy and smashing it into the asteroid.
Is that what they meant by mass impactor?
That is what they meant by bulk impactor.
Oh, bulk impactor. Okay.
Bulk
yes.
impactor. Huh?
So something really heavy, and you slam it into the asteroid and hope that you basically nudge it enough with said impact to just slightly deflect it. And if you deflect it a little bit when it's far enough away, it doesn't hit the Earth. So that's good.
By way of analogy, it's sort of like bowling. If you have a really bad throw and it goes in the gutter right away, you miss all the pins. But if there's only a little bit of wobble right towards the end of the lane, then you still might hit some of the pins, even if you don't hit it dead on.
Right. Or, yeah, the idea being like, we want to induce a little bit of a wobble all the way back at the front of the lane.
Yeah, we want it to go in the gutter. We're trying to get it to go in the gutter. And so the earlier we knock it off course, the better odds of it going into the gutter and not hitting anything, is what I was trying to say.
Right. So this is a bowling ball that's maybe going to hit the kingpin, right? And is it the kingpin?
Who's the king? I didn't know the pins had names.
Isn't the lead pin the kingpin?
Yeah.
I did not. I had no idea. I'm totally new to this.
I'm pretty sure that's right. So the lead pin in the triangle, I'm pretty sure is kingpin. So anyway,
I mean, if I stopped getting strikes, maybe I would know these things.
Maybe.
So imagine there's a bowling ball. It's back at the front of the lane, and there's an arc that bowling ball could travel in based on projections. And there's a chance that Earth falls within that arc. And so what we want to do is we want to just nudge it a little bit while it's still way back at the front of the lane so that arc just misses the kingpin. And that way there's 0% chance of it hitting the Earth. So that's the idea. You just nudge it a little tiny bit way far away and it'll miss. The other way they're looking at it, of course, because, America, is send a nuclear warhead up to it and nudge it using a giant nuclear detonation, which could do the same thing.
And get rid of one of our nukes.
So, that's a good thing. If anybody watches mediocre sci-fi, there's a show called Salvation that actually kind of goes through this thought experiment of doing both of these things and whether or not one of them is good. And then they also talk about using a gravity tractor, which is basically just send something heavy nearby and the gravity between the two will pull it off course.
Yep. So literally a tractor beam.
Yes.
If the beam is the bond of gravity between the two objects out in space.
Right. There's
I was
not
on
like
tractor ones, and they don't have beams.
But they tow stuff real good, and that's essentially what we're doing. We're tractoring it out of the way.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So how do you feel about all this stuff, Joe? Like, how does this sit in your engineering brain?
I feel like the statement that they're only studying it probably isn't good enough. We probably should be working on this kind of thing and have it just, it's one of those things you kind of want to just have in the can, I feel like.
Right. I mean, we want our bulk impactor already in orbit, ready to fling at whatever it needs to be flung at the second we see it.
Right.
And then we probably want another one on deck, and we want to have like almost a conveyor belt of bulk impactors, ready
like
to fend off the...
Launch a couple of them and send them out and put them in a parking orbit around the moon or something. And then if we need them, we can slingshot them around the Earth and send them off where they need to go.
Oh, people are going to love that. People are going to love the fact that we're slingshotting our bulk impactor back around Earth. People are not going to understand why that's necessary. They're just going to cry foul that we're trying to end the world by hitting it with asteroids.
Right. But yeah, I think that we should probably, go and do this. It's like that T-shirt, the asteroids, or the universe's way of saying, how's that asteroid program coming? Mm-hmm. Or how's that space program coming?
You know what else would make this much less of a existential threat? A Mars and lunar colony. Permanent.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
Yep, they're going to get hit too.
Eventually, but living in 2 or 3 places means if one place gets severely damaged, you've got backups.
Yep.
Like, the fact that we only have 1 seed bank up in Svalbard, like, that's great, but...
2. There's one in Arizona.
Okay. Well, I would like one on the moon.
That just doubled your odds.
I would like one at the bottom of the ocean. I would like one on the moon. I would like one in Lagrange point. I don't want to use the phrase, I want to spread our seed everywhere, but I think that's the only way to say it.
Well, you can't just spread your seed everywhere. You got to make sure your
wild
seed
oats
takes birth.
Well, you just put it, shielding. I mean, water is a great radiation shield.
Yeah, but they don't have seeds.
What? What are you talking about?
Water doesn't have seeds, Ryan. You can't just go throwing phrases around like that.
I don't understand the joke you're making right now.
Never mind.
I'm kind of Ryan here.
So, Joe, are these the kind of plans that you would promote, or do you have like your own idea for how we should? I mean, other than actually doing the plan instead of just talking about the plan, like what else goes on in your head when you think about these big, decadal engineering undertakings that we ought to be doing but aren't?
The thing about this is it's probably not that big of an undertaking. It's just something that we should just do and have ready. Building just a heavy payload to slap on top of a rocket and launch might not actually take all that much time unless, well, yeah, I mean, like a 9-ton launch vehicle isn't actually that heavy. I mean, we could launch that on a Falcon Heavy, no problem. It's just we haven't, But they are sending a spacecraft out to this asteroid to grab a sample of it, which will tell us what it's made of. One problem would be if you send an impactor out to something you think is rock and it turns out to be iron, and then it doesn't do anything. It just bounces off.
Right. If you measure the mass of the thing that might hit us wrong.
Right. And then you send a mass impactor, you're going to get your equation of energy transfer wrong, and it's not going to do anything.
Right. It's like if you tried to deflect a beach ball but you didn't know the beach ball was filled with lead.
Right. Or it's like those videos where somebody gets tired of kids knocking their mailbox off its post with a baseball bat, so they fill it with concrete, and then it goes poorly.
What happens? I've never seen these videos.
No.
I don't need to see them.
Like break your arm.
Oh, they're breaking them with your hand. I thought they had like a baseball bat or some kind of tool. I thought
Yeah. But
even with a baseball bat.
Like you swing a baseball bat at a mailbox that's just on a post, and the mailbox just comes off. But you swing it at a post that's full of concrete, the bat just stops, and then you hurt your hand.
I mean, are we talking a wood bat or a metal? I guess a metal bat would hurt worse.
Even more.
Even more.
Well, I mean, I have a wood bat, so I just
at least break.
Apparently, I'm a mailbox breaking hipster because my wooden bat would just absorb the impact and shatter, and I'm sure it would still hurt me a fair bit, but not as bad as a wooden bat. I mean, I'm not crazy.
That's a aluminum bat, yeah, that'd be bad.
Oh yeah.
So we're trying to get a sample from this asteroid.
Yes, with the OSIRIS-REx spacecraft.
Okay, so presumably we gotta land on the thing. Right?
Yeah, which will be a challenge. I'm not sure what they're planning on doing about that.
So why not just, land on the thing now with a lander that can, instead of trying to make an impact, just lands on it and then slowly just, uses some thrusters or something to adjust its path, very slowly over the next 100 years.
Yeah, sure. Grasp on and then just light a thruster off.
Yeah, just gently.
Right, and slowly deflect your way away. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be more worthwhile?
I think you'd still need a lot of thrust. It's a big asteroid, it seems like. So you're gonna need a lot of power to move it. So you need a lot of fuel to move it with a rocket of some sort.
Right.
Electric propulsion is not yet at the point where you could do it with electric propulsion. I don't think. Maybe one day you could, but you could potentially launch a nuke to it, land the nuke on it, and then use the reaction to just push it away rather than trying to blow it up.
Right. It seems to me like that would be a lot more efficient.
Go with an Orion project type.
Yeah,
solution.
Because you shift it 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters now. In 50 years, how far is it going to go?
Right. How many parsecs off course, right? I think that's a correct use of parsec.
Yeah. I don't think you could push it entire parsecs off course, Joe.
Fractions of a parsec?
Fractions of an AU, probably. A much smaller unit than parsecs.
Whatever.
What if we built a nuke that could impact the asteroid, but then deploy off the sides of the missile shaft a new conical funnel, and create a new rocket booster to funnel the explosion? Would that work? Some sort of transformer?
Like a shape charge to funnel the explosion?
Like a jet engine?
A shape charge. I thought shape charge, don't they usually funnel an explosion downward? I'm thinking of funneling the explosion outward.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about. Just landing a nuke on the surface. If you detonated a nuke that was attached to the surface of the asteroid, then the asteroid's going to go off one direction and the explosion is going to go the other.
You just got to make sure you land it on the correct side.
I know, that's what I was just thinking of. Is there a way you could steer the explosion? That's all I was thinking.
Gotcha. Yeah, the problem too with asteroids is that they're usually just tumbling. So to actually land on it is tricky.
Well, that was another question I had, because they said that Bennu was relatively spherical. Does the sphericity of the object make a difference in how you can bulk impact it out of the way?
Oh, that would probably help a lot, because it makes it easier to approach and get close to, versus something that's tumbling that it's going to be tricky to predict it'll be tricky to predict the trajectory of the resultant collision, If you're launching a sphere, you can probably get a pretty reasonable guess at how it's going to react to the explosion or the impact, versus if something's just tumbling through space and it's oblong or something, and you hit it at a funny angle, right? You miscalculate the collision at the wrong time, and you just end up spinning it faster instead of deflecting it or something. Right,
it'd be like playing baseball with a football shaped baseball.
Yeah, that could go all kinds of wrong.
Interesting.
You might get it perfect, but probably not. But with a sphere, with a sphere, it's easier.
Could we have an impactor big enough that would break off a smaller chunk, or a bunch of smaller chunks that would then make it more likely to hit us?
Yeah, well, that's always a concern if you're trying to blow up the asteroid, right? If you just launch a nuke at the thing and it breaks the asteroid into a bunch of pieces, and then we just get hit by 4 smaller asteroids. That's bad. So that's certainly a concern with the explosive route, unless you're careful about it, I guess. or really sure what it's made of, which is good that this OSIRIS-REx mission, it's on its way there to figure out what it's made of.
Cool.
But the problem is this is just one rock, and there's a lot of rocks out there.
Right.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the real concern, the reason you want to launch something and get it up there earlier is that, maybe we missed one, right? Maybe we track a lot of objects in space, but there's a lot of objects in space that we don't know are out there. So sometimes things just like appear and they're like, oh, look, we found a new asteroid. It's going to miss us by, less than the distance from the Earth to the moon, but don't worry, it's going to miss us. Like, oh, okay. But it's worth saying right now that the odds of it hitting us are around 1 in 2,700 per the article, which is, they're okay odds, but they're not as good as I'd like them to be.
Yeah, I kind of had that thought too. The article tried to kind of maybe downplay the odds, make them seem low, and I'm like, astronomically, those don't seem like as low an odds as I might want.
Yeah.
But, the good news is that according to The Economist magazine, the odds of being killed by an asteroid are 1 in 74 million. So
that's pretty good.
So there you go. I think what they're trying to say is it'll hit us, but it won't kill us.
And whatever doesn't kill you could wreck your entire civilization.
Could kill you later.
Speaking of the cause of and solution to all of life's problems, let's move on to our next segment where we talk about what we are drinking.
You were right. I was wrong again. What will they say when I die? Everything looks better in my head. 9 pounds heavier than they said. So take me back to Minnesota in the snow. I turned my back and tried to make it home. Clearly I've no hammer to hold. So watch my back with mercy as I go, as I'm attacked by this burning afterglow. Clearly I've no hammer to hold.
Well, it would not be an episode of Science Sort of if we did not also talk about what we are drinking. Abe, I made you go first last time you and Joe were on the show, so Joe, the honor is now yours.
All right, so since it's the apocalypse now, I'm drinking a Nuka-Cola that I found.
It's the end of not a Nuka-Cola Quantum.
Yeah, sure, Nuka-Cola Quantum
Has different effects in the game than a Nuka-Cola or a Sunset Sarsaparilla.
Sunset.
I kind of see you as a Sunset Sarsaparilla guy.
Yeah, I mean, I go back and forth between the two, if I'm honest. It depends on what I can find.
What you can scavenge in the wasteland?
What I can scavenge in the wastes, yeah. No, so I am drinking a Johnnie Ryan's Black Cherry Soda from the local soda shop, but I've been around since 1935 up there in Niagara Falls. Interesting fun fact about this soda is that it is printed, all the labeling is printed in 2 languages. First one being English, second one being French, which I found interesting. I'm assuming that's due to the Niagara Falls proximity to Canada and their French component.
Francophonage.
Francophonage, yeah, I think that's the right word. Just like Canada.
I follow Justin Trudeau on Twitter, and he tweets everything twice, because he tweets once in French and once in English.
That's very nice of him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is a soda à sucre de canne. Anyway, cane sugar soda. Cane sugar, it's really good.
Yeah. Nice.
Delicieux. It's delicious. Yeah, and it's pretty good. So, yeah, black cherry soda.
You had a black cherry soda last time. You're just going around the world in black cherry sodas.
You know, I like black cherry soda. I went on a black cherry soda 6-pack binge when I was at the soda shop and just picked up a bunch.
Oh, you did like a mix of 6, but everything was a black cherry
at least
soda?
some of it was black cherry. Yeah, I think I have one more in the fridge that I gotta kill.
All right, well, we'll have to record again.
Yeah.
Abe?
I'm drinking beer.
Me too.
And I actually, I've been trying to figure out what I'm drinking because Beverly poured my beer for me and then brought me the bottle covered up.
Oh, a little blinded taste test.
Yeah, and They're all dark beers. There's 3 stouts and a Scotch ale, and I'm actually having a little bit of a hard time trying to figure out if it's a really heavy Scotch ale or a very light stout. Both stouts have additives. One has chocolate and one has coffee and chocolate. And then there's a Belgian one. And I'm going to say, well, this kind of tastes like a Belgian one, but I was wrong.
Oh, you had a little card to reveal the answer?
I have the bottle. It was covered.
Oh, okay.
I am drinking Xocoveza, an imperial stout inspired by Mexican hot chocolate. Stout brewed with cocoa, coffee, peppers, vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Cinnamon and nutmeg. That's what was throwing me off, not the chocolate. It's pretty good. It's fairly light-bodied. So for an imperial stout, I think it's not as heavy and dense as some of the other ones I've had in the past. But the spices, vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and peppers do add a nice little brightness to the beer. And I'd never had it before, so this is nice. Thank you, Beverly, for picking my beer.
Good old Beverly.
What you didn't tell you is that she added some laxative in there. That's the weird taste. That's why you didn't get it.
I'll find that out tomorrow. Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
What are you drinking?
I went with something local. Also a beer. Black Flag Brewing Company in Columbia, Maryland. It's weird that there's a Columbia, Maryland right outside the District of Columbia. Like, get your own Columbias, Maryland.
Get your own district.
This is a Mambo Sauce Imperial or double IPA.
Mambo Sauce?
Yes, you know what I've explained to you what Mambo Sauce is. We've had this conversation, Abe.
You're going to have to explain it to me.
Mambo Sauce is a sauce native and popular here in the DMV, which is the term for the DC metro area, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And it is a sauce popularized in Americanized Chinese takeout places that serve chicken wings and fried rice, predominantly or at least originally to the African-American community here of DC. And it's a sauce that comes with those chicken wings. It's a very kind of sweet sauce. If I had to guess, it's probably just some combination of ketchup and sweet and sour sauce. And I gave Abe a bottle, so I'm pretty upset that he didn't clock that's what this was.
I haven't tried it.
Well, why not?
Because you also gave me 2 others, and then I also have a backlog of like 10 bottles that I'm trying to finish before I open new ones.
All right, fair enough. Abe and I have a hot sauce exchange going on, Joe. If you didn't know that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, we have a hot sauce club
of 2 people.
3.
And so, so that's what Mambo Sauce is, and it's grown in popularity recently, so there's a company, or 1 or 2 companies that have started bottling it and selling it, and there is one that's like a spicier version that I think is better than the stuff you get from the Chinese takeout places. I definitely, every once in a while, will crave the very crispy chicken wings and fried rice combo, but I often use my own Mambo and hot sauces. But I saw this beer, and I was like, oh, that's funny, and then Julie saw it when I brought it home, and she was like, "Oh, it doesn't actually have Mambo Sauce in it, does it?" I was like, "No, I think it's just a name." So it's just a double IPA, nothing too fancy or special to write home about. I swapped it out for a different beer at the last second because I'm sick and tired of these hazy New England IPAs, Abe. Tired of them.
That's fair.
I wanted something that's been through a filter for once in its life.
I can't help you there.
Well, maybe you can help me when it comes time to predicting an upcoming volcanic eruption, because that's what we're going to talk about in our second segment.
Hey, Ryan and Joe.
Why is it so gall-dang hard to predict when volcanoes are going to go off?
They're just unpredictable. They got moods and
see you next
stuff.
week.
They got attitude. And it's real hard.
Would you say they're under pressure?
Sometimes. Well, technically no. Technically they're over pressure.
Well, okay.
Does that work?
I see where the linguistic wires got crossed, but we're going to ignore it and we're going to move on.
They're bloated sometimes.
So the story we're talking about, since Abe seems hesitant to introduce the story we're talking about.
I'll introduce it.
Thank you, Abe.
You're very welcome. So the article we're talking about is a story from Scientific American, the title of which is Volcano Forecast. New technique could better predict eruptions. Yeah, so eruptions are really hard to predict. A big part of that is there's just so many different aspects to what makes a volcano active, and there's so many different types of activity. It's really hard to really capture everything that makes up a volcano. Each volcano is also different. Crustal variations, or the type of crust that it's sitting on, or this form, the activity below it, and a big part of it is it's really hard to measure things that are not at the surface. So most of the activity in a volcano, happens prior to the eruption. It's what brings the magma up near the surface enough to cause an eruption. And there are so many different factors that can affect how a volcano behaves. And, just because we've seen one type of activity at a particular volcano for many, many eruption cycles doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. It's a pretty good place to start, but there's no guarantees. And so it makes it really hard to have a sense of what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And so that being said, there are a number of tools at our disposal that can at least help us. And so we mentioned earlier in this episode, Kīlauea volcano. Kīlauea has been erupting for a while. There's, all kinds of activity that's been ongoing for decades. And the current phase of the Leilani fissures actually showed some activity of inflation. And inflation, you can think of exactly like a balloon. You push some air into the balloon, it's going to inflate. You can do the same with the crust around a volcano. And so magma intrudes, comes up from below into the upper section. And if it doesn't have a void space to go into, then it's going to have to make space. And the easiest ways to do that is to, sort of push the crust up, because there's nothing holding the crust at the surface. And so it's easy to deform it. And that's something that we can measure. And as you can imagine, lots of movement in the crust starts to create signs, things like small tremors and earthquakes. And so this article talks about a new publication that's using a little bit of a different technique than what's traditionally done for predicting volcanic eruptions. And it's looking at data from satellites that's almost live monitoring, basically looking at the surface deformation of volcanic areas and trying to understand, how it's changing real time.
So they're making like real time micro scale topographical maps of the surface to see if it changes or it gets higher or something, right?
Correct. Yeah. And, we like to think of volcanoes as being, when they're active, they're very much alive, they're breathing. When magma comes up from the depths, you can picture breathing in and your lungs expand. So the surface of the volcano, deforms and inflates, and you have surface deformation that can be measured. And for volcanoes that are very well monitored, we have a lot of different instruments that tell us this is happening. And so Kīlauea is a perfect example because they had a sense of where the lava was going before the eruption happened. They knew that there was magma intrusion into the eastern flank and the rift zone. days ahead of time because there were tremors and harmonic shaking. It's very different from a single earthquake. So you have these low intensity shaking in the ground that helps you figure out, is this a one-time event, or is like kind of like an earthquake, just something rupturing, or if it's something that's slowly deforming and cracking its way through the crust, like magma intrusion would do. And so the HVO, Hawaii Volcano Observatory, had actually recorded ground deformation and a lot of increased activity in the eastern flank of Kīlauea leading up to this eruption. So, that's a good sign when it starts to show activity that is different from what it's been doing for months. That being said, it's still 3 or 4 days of lead time is not great, but it's better than none. And there are eruptions that happen unexpected. And where it becomes a really big issue is places where you don't have the kind of infrastructure and monitoring logistics that places like Hawaii do. You don't have instruments laid out across the entire volcanic system that tell you, what part is deforming and what part is shaken up, and in which way. So this remote-based observation tool, can change some of that by giving us access near real time to what's happening in areas where we might lack the infrastructure to monitor volcanic activities.
How much of this problem is a timescale problem? Like, volcanoes are really bad once they're happening, but the buildup is so long that it just doesn't register. It doesn't register in our like primate brains as an imminent enough threat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it really depends. And a big part of it, I alluded to it earlier, it depends the style of volcano. We tend to think of some areas of the world as being like, super volcanically active and, people are used to it and it's not so bad because it's not this massive destruction. But, places like Hawaii and Iceland where, volcanoes are common, there's a lot of activity and it's pretty ongoing. It's very frequent that you have eruptions, and luckily a lot of it happens in areas where it doesn't affect many people, but sometimes that's not the case. And that's when people start to really panic. So this article also brings up one of my favorite volcanoes. Ryan, can you guess which one it is?
Efeafeoko.
That's really good.
Thanks. I mean, it's a little slow, but
but
not completely unpracticed. Yeah. Efeafeoko.
There you go.
You do it now, Joe.
Efeafeoko.
Not bad.
Yeah.
To my ear.
Abe said you did it right, so I copied you.
That's always a good strategy.
That's what matters. Yeah, so the 2010 eruption of Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland, which was obviously became very famous for halting air traffic in Europe and the US and in between. That one's actually also another eruption that is very well monitored in the area. The Icelandic Meteorological Office actually has a really good network of monitoring stations, and they track everything from hydrology, earthquakes, avalanches. They have volcano deformation or ground deformation stations, and they could track the activity of magma movement ahead of the eruption. So it wasn't a surprise when the eruption happened. What changed is that it shifted from erupting at the saddle between the summit of Eyjafjallajökull and the neighboring volcano, and it shifted under the ice cap that's currently sitting on that volcano. And that, is not completely unexpected, but it's one of the many, many options that could have happened at this volcano. And it's just happens to be what happened, which created the chaos that most people came to know as the 2010 eruption. Caused a lot of fragmentation of the ash because it was erupting under a glacier. So the interaction with water created the big plume that then wreaked havoc. And so things like that, we can have as much monitoring equipment as they did, and it still would have been really hard to predict that was going to happen. And so we have limited tools and limited access to what happens under a volcano, but the more tools, the better. And so, it's really awesome that we're still looking at new and different ways of trying to get live or at least real-time data with fewer infrastructure, costs, hopefully. If it's something that you can monitor lots of active volcanic areas with one instrument that's just orbiting the Earth, and that makes it all that much better.
So I'm envisioning an autonomous blimp or airship that just circles known volcanic locations with LiDAR all day, every day. Just flies around in circles, topographically mapping the volcano and maybe sampling the air for gas emissions. And it just does that all day, every day. And if something is suddenly out of the ordinary, it sounds an alarm.
We kind of already do that, though, except on the ground,
okay.
Right?
Okay.
So we have these networks of stations that each do different things. And so you can have, 5 or 6 instruments that cover large areas. And if you have, seismometers and ground deformation, basically GPS stations that can very highly sensitive GPS stations that can tell you millimeters to centimeter scale how much it's changing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that Hawaii, at least Hawaii Volcano Observatory, HVO, uses a lot are tilt meters or, tilt recorders. And so it can tell you which way the ground is tilting. And you can deploy a set of instruments like this on any volcano, and it's immediately going to give you, a wealth of data that's going to help. It's as expensive, maybe not as well. It could be very expensive, maybe not as expensive as having a continuous blimp flying around. I guess I don't know what's the fuel efficiency of blimps.
Very, very good.
Oh, cool. So maybe it's cheaper to do that with a LiDAR.
Especially if you slap some solar panels on top and power it with electricity.
Yeah, that is a really good point. How does it fare in bad weather?
Not so great. But usually we know when bad weather is coming, you could land it.
Right. Yeah, so the trade-off there being that, if you put a ground network of monitoring stations, they're there and they're only monitoring that one region or area that you picked.
Right.
The advantage of something like this is that you're not confined to that one system that you picked. It's mobile. You can use it many different areas. And I should mention, I didn't actually mention the study itself was by researchers from the University of Mont Blanc in France, Université Savoie Mont Blanc. The lead researcher, Grace Bateau, and the study itself is called Assimilation of Deformation Data for Eruption Forecasting, Potentiality Assessment Based on Synthetic Cases, and it was published on Frontiers in Earth Science last year. So if anybody wants to go and look at this article, it looks like it's open source, so we'll post a link. You can go and seek it out. Yeah, so pretty cool research happening. It's, adding to our arsenal of tools to be able to tell what's happening with volcanoes. And then the one bone I have to pick with Scientific American, there's a statement in here that mentions that current methods are mostly qualitative.
Yeah, well, I did want to ask about that. Okay.
Yeah. Methods that the current eruption forecasts use are qualitative, and I'm going to 100% disagree with that because our eruption forecast models at the moment in most observatories are using hard data. We're using seismometers, which record earthquakes. We have a pretty good idea of the difference between crustal earthquakes, caused by just adjustment of the crust, and that caused by something fluidly moving through the crust. We call it harmonic tremors. And so when it's magma moving through the crust, it tends to be a little bit more of a vibration or, harmonic motion. Whereas when it's an earthquake that's related to just adjustment in the crust, like you would see in California with the San Andreas Fault, you tend to have a shock that's far higher magnitude than the rest of the activity. And so it's like one adjustment that's like, boom, and then everything shakes to adjust for what just happened. And so that's just one example. Ground deformation, we do measure inflation and deformation of the crust. We're able to do that from the ground. Tilting, and all of these are just hard data, quantitative methods of monitoring that help us predict what's happening.
I think what they meant by saying it was qualitative is that unlike looking at the barometric pressure and knowing it's about to rain, there's no one value we can look at and know that a volcano is going to go off.
Yeah, that is true.
That was how I interpreted the statement. It's qualitative. I don't know if that's the correct usage of the word or if it. I mean, you've explained why there's some nuance in that way of thinking about it, but that was
a little bit of reading the tea leaves that's involved versus.
Sure.
And it sounds like the biggest problem or the biggest difference between meteorology and volcanology is simply it's hard to tell what's going on underground.
Yeah, you can't see it, right? So you're basically relying on these secondary observations to know what's happening down there. And it makes it really, really hard. And so going back to the quantitative versus qualitative part of forecasting, I do agree if the usage as you described, Ryan, is in that we're still guessing at what all this data means. It's an educated guess, but at the end of the day, we see a lot of activity. Yellowstone is a good example. We see a lot of activity that doesn't necessarily mean it's an eruption, but it's activity related to eruptive processes. And so we can easily say, oh, there's an increase of activity, something's about to happen, but that just wouldn't be very accurate because there's also a lot of activity when nothing happens, and that happens very frequently in volcanic systems. Even when magma is just adjusting its position, it's moving back and forth, or, something else. A lot of it can also be caused by non-magma pressurization, so water vapor or, degassing. We see that with fumaroles, sometimes it's literally just water moving through the crust. So there are a lot of qualitative interpretations that go into understanding our quantitative information. So from that perspective, I would agree. There's still a component of qualitative forecasting that goes into all of this.
So what would you like to see next? What would be, if you got to design a volcanic monitoring system, how would you put it together?
Oh, that's hard. I think there are very many... if you weren't resource limited or finance limited,
let's say we care about volcanoes not blowing up underneath people enough to put money into it.
Let's say the government cares about science. Let's
pretend. Let's live in a fantasy world.
I think what volcano observatories like Hawaii do well, and others in the USGS system, we have ground truthing, and you really can't do without. And so the variety of instruments that you can put on the ground is really, really significant. So, definitely being able to monitor the shaking, so seismometers. Being able to monitor deformation, so high sensitivity GPS stations and, tilt meters. But then another big aspect of it is also chemistry. So having stations where you can continually monitor chemistry of what's coming out of the ground, that can tell you a lot about what's happening underground. If it's just water vapor, that might not be a big deal. It might just be a fumarole or hot spring activity. If it's sulfur dioxide, that could be significantly different. It still could be just fumarole activity, but having a good understanding of all of those parameters would be great. And then, if you can add on to that LiDAR or some remote-based continual observations, really does help a lot because you can cover much bigger scale and have really good data that you don't have to be on the ground collecting this information day in and day out. If it's just coming to you remotely, integrating all of this would be ideal. And the final note I'll add to that is, even with all of that, there's still some amount of guesswork that's going to happen. And I think, Ryan, you alluded to this earlier. It's a matter of time. That's something we can't really, that would be really hard to predict. There's like the time component. We can see activity months ahead of time. This happened at St. Helens. There was months of deformation, and it was getting to the point where, well, people were getting impatient because the USGS kept predicting that this, was going to be a big activity, and then it just like nothing. And then just about when people were losing patience for it, the volcano erupted. But it was months of trying to guess, like, oh, is it close? No, but it's still not, going back to normal. It might be days, it might be months. It's just the volcano's going to do what a volcano's going to do.
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever asked you. Do you have a favorite volcanic deity?
Ooh, I'm not sure. I mean, I'd probably have to say Pele. Yeah, I shared some of my tequila with Pele.
You poured one out for Pele?
I did. I wanted to take a rock.
Oh, so you gave an offering in order to take a rock?
Yeah. I went in when I was working in Hawaii many years ago. Well, working being relative. I was taking a field course in Hawaii, and I was staying right inside the Volcanoes National Park, some of the military establishments. And so one morning I get up really early, went for a run to the crater rim, and I brought my tequila with me, and I sat there and had a drink for me, shared a drink with Pele, and then I mentioned, hey, I'm about to grab a rock from that over there place. Not in the park, of course, because that's illegal. And then I went and picked up a nice little sample that I still have.
Joe?
Ryan?
Question for you. Which car manufacturer has a high-end sports car, maybe even a hypercar, named after a volcanic deity?
I'm going to go with the Pagani Huayra.
Nope. The Lamborghini Huracan.
Oh.
Apparently Huracan is the one of the Mayan gods of fire.
Interesting.
I did
Fire god and god of storms. So anyway, I was always partial to Hephaestus. I like a guy who can make stuff and gets the girl.
Okay.
I don't know.
Had you not offered up some tequila before you took the rock, would you have ended up in the afterlife and had to get somebody's blessing to come back?
That's a good question.
Is Abe eligible for the Hawaiian afterlife?
I don't know.
I guess now that you've sacrificed to their god, you might be. We don't really.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was going for a Coco reference, and I realized you might not have seen it.
I have not, but I need to. But yeah.
Yeah, that feels like an oversight.
It's pretty good.
I heard great things about it. I don't spend a lot of time in front of a TV.
That is true.
Fair enough.
But we do like to spend a lot of time with our listeners. I guess that's not true because we do this remotely most times. But
yeah, we try to avoid spending actual time with the listeners.
But to make up for the lack of time spent with the listeners, we do like to take some listener feedback and end the show with that. And that is what we are doing next.
This is a public service announcement. This is only a test. Emergency evacuation protest may impair your ability to operate machinery. Can't quite tell just what it means to me. Keep out of reach at children. Don't you talk to stranger. Get your philosophy from a bumper sticker. Warning, live without warning. I say warning, live without warning. Without, alright.
We're going to end the show as we always end the show, and that's with a little feedback from the listeners. I have the pleasure of going first this week because I am the one who gets to present, or at least present the name of one of our new recurring patrons, Rich B.
Woo. Yeah, Rich.
So Rich went over and signed up to be a recurring donor on Patreon, which we are very, very grateful for. And for his troubles, he gets a BSSO, which is our official Bachelor of Science, sort of. And so we need to give Rich a thesis title, preferably based around the themes covered in this week's episode. So what are you guys thinking?
Hammer down. Something
Hammering
like
volcanoes.
The effect of bulk impactors on magma chambers?
hammer shock.
Like, what if we're just hitting? What if we're just hitting volcanoes with big rocks to see what happens?
Oh.
Hammer shock. Use of bulk impactors to cause micro eruptions to prevent major eruptions.
Oh.
Mitigating
So-
the effects.
No.
Mitigating
Okay,
the effects of
I got
major
an
eruptions
idea.
or something.
Mapping volcanic systems.
it should be love taps using bulk impactors to create microquakes to prevent large scale eruptions. Right?
That could work. I was thinking more going in the direction of, to map the internal system of a volcano.
Well, okay. Give me something.
Like-
give me a
like
flavor.
the
Give me a
Jurassic
taste.
All right. So
Like
so
the
what
Jurassic
was
Park raptor thing.
Love
yeah,
taps. I suggested love taps using
I
bulk
think that's good. So
using
love taps.
bulk impactors to induce microquakes in volcanic systems, and then give me something to follow up with that, Abe.
For mapping the
Because you can map stuff using seismic waves.
yes, I know.
I know.
Ground
but
penetrating.
Abe, I
radar.
wasn't telling you. We have these things called listeners.
How about
Mapping intracrustal magma pathways.
Intracrustal.
Just crustal. Crustal magma pathways in volcanic edifices. Active volcanic edifices. How about that?
Man, this is definitely one of... So, okay. Love taps. Using bulk impactors to induce microquakes for mapping crustal magma pathways in active volcanic edifices.
I think we should use hammer shock instead of love taps.
How about love taps using hammer shock induced
Hammer shock's a
seismicity?
real thing. That's why I say it.
Oh, it's like a real engineering materials test or whatever?
It's a hammer shock is a phenomenon where, like, if you have something under high pressure, like a fluid flowing under high pressure, and you rapidly close a valve in that system, the fluid flow abruptly stops, and that creates a hammer shock, which travels throughout your system and can blow stuff up.
It sounds like we don't want to do that to the volcano, though.
No, but it's what's happening in the volcano.
It sounds like a bad thing.
We're going to stop it
It sounds like we're going to be causing it if we're hitting it.
with bulk impactors.
Abe, it's your call. Hammer shocks or love taps?
I like them both. Why can't we just have both?
Then tell me how to incorporate both of them.
¿Por qué no los dos?
Joe, why not both?
Well, where do I put each of them?
Yeah, I don't know how we get both of them in there.
All right, read me what you got. Love taps.
Using bulk impactors to induce microquakes for mapping crustal magma pathways in active volcanic edifices.
And you said hammer shock is the other. What about instead of bulk impactors, just hammer shock?
Or what about using bulk impactors to induce hammer shock?
Oh, Joe?
Okay.
All right, cool. Rich,
There we go.
that is definitely one of the most intense, potentially useful theses we've given out.
And it's definitely BS.
Well, it seems like a big undertaking for a fake degree, but, that's what Rich decided to do. Wild hearts can't be broken, you guys.
Can they?
They cannot. That's just a fact about corazones silvestres.
Okay.
Let's see. Abe... Yeah, Abe goes next.
I go next.
You go next.
I have a thing.
Tell us your thing.
We have an email from Frank, and Frank says, PaleoPOWs. Scientists analyze 170-year-old beer. This seems right up your alley. Press coverage at, and we have a Reuters link, an article itself at, and then we have a publication link. Cheers, Frank. So the article that Frank sent to us, titled "Scientists May Recreate Beer from 1840s Shipwreck," and it's a pretty cool article. It's about 170-year-old beer found in a shipwreck from the 1840s near Finland. And some researchers from Finland say that they've been able to recreate that beer after finding that there was live bacteria in the beer that survived. And this was a shipwreck near the Åland Islands, near just offshore from Finland, which I think is pretty cool. I definitely would drink that.
I don't know that you would. Because this is what I don't understand about this article. Isn't it bad that you found bacteria alive in the beer? Isn't that the point of making beer, that it doesn't allow for the growth of bacteria?
I'd still drink it.
Okay, well, that article we were sent is a few years old, and there have been updates. And we'll see how long you want to continue saying that you would drink it.
What are the updates?
They smelt like a tempting combination of Bakelite, an early synthetic plastic renowned for its fishy smell, burnt rubber, overly ripe cheese, and I know you don't like overly ripe cheeses, Abe. I know that about you.
Correction. Overly ripe cheeses that don't smell bad.
Goat, which
I like goats.
I know. I don't know if they mean like carne de birra or like actual just goat skin or hair.
Yeah.
Dimethyl sulfide, which is commonly likened to rotting cabbage.
I've had rotten shark.
So apparently it was super vinegary, tasted of goats and soured milk, and they couldn't get any fruitiness or maltiness from it. But again, like, this is because the bacteria ruined the beer. Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, that's why I was confused why you'd be excited. I guess you'd be excited for the live bacteria because you could sample something that's been cut off from the rest of the organic world for that long. But it's not going to help the beer.
I'd still want to try it.
All right, well.
You're more adventurous than I am.
I'd probably try it too, but I wouldn't expect it to smell very good. Or taste very good, or be very good.
Ryan, you've been there. We have put rotten shark in our mouth.
It's true.
It's gross.
Voluntarily.
It was gross.
We're just adventurers, Joe. That's all.
So the researchers concluded that it probably, this beer is recent enough in the history of brewing that they were using essentially modern brewing techniques, hops, barley, yeast. So this isn't like beer so old that it didn't even use hops. There are, beer styles old enough that hops weren't really a thing in beer, and there are beer styles old enough that they didn't really know that yeast was a thing you should introduce in a controlled way. So this beer is new enough that...
The magic stick?
Yeah, exactly. The magic brewing stick that when you stir the beer, it somehow magically ferments because it's covered in all the yeast from previous brews. So the researchers concluded, or at least the follow-up research concluded, that they think it would have tasted pretty similar to modern-day beers, which is not very surprising to me, but still kind of a cool story. So thanks, Frank, for sending it our way.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, and I stand by what I said. I would love to try that beer.
You may stand by that, Abe.
I may not enjoy it.
I'll be standing over here.
Smelling sauerkraut just to avoid the smell of actually rotten cabbage that Abe is drinking.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Joe, what do you got for us?
I've got a voicemail. Somebody called our voicemail line, which
How about
is
that?
pretty exciting. I don't think we get very many of those, do we?
No, I've gotten out of the habit of actually saying the voicemail line. It's 3127. It's 312 PaleoPOWs. That's 312-725-3672, I think. So if you want to call in, you still can, or you can also record yourself on your phone and just email it to us. That works too.
So anyway, we got a voicemail from Jonathan. He is a PhD student at the University of Illinois, and he had a question, which I guess you'll drop in. Meow.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Wong. I'm a PhD student at the University of Illinois. I was wondering if you could talk about combustion engines on your next podcast and possibly alternative fuels that are more efficient or cleaner. There's been a lot of recent advances in electric cars, for example, like Tesla. I was wondering if there are other alternatives to combustion that still uses fuel that's cleaner than what we currently use. So if you could call me back, my number is... Thank you.
Okay, so Jonathan wants to know about combustion engines and alternative fuels and gasoline and all that jazz. So, most of the cars running around are running an internal combustion engine of some sort or another.
Can you explain briefly how that actually works? Like, how does an internal combustion engine...
I'm about to.
Okay, I'm sorry. We didn't discuss this ahead of time.
I'm getting...
Does it combust on the inside?
It combusts internally. Do you need to know more? Okay. So there's two main kinds of internal combustion engines running around on the streets of the world these days. You've got engines that run on gasoline, and then engines that run on diesel fuel. Those pretty much cover the large majority of car engines, and they basically work by taking a mixture of gasoline or diesel fuel and air and compressing that down to a high enough pressure that it can either be made to explode with a spark in a gasoline engine or just combusts on its own under the pressure for diesel fuel. And so those fuels are diesel and gasoline are both derived from petroleum, which we dig up out of the ground, and then it gets burned and you get carbon dioxide and other particulate and gaseous exhaust coming out the back end of the car. And obviously those gas exhausts and particulate matter aren't great for the planet, so we've been working to get those, more and more, get the engines more efficient by using less fuel and also cleaning up the exhausts with like catalytic converters and such devices to clean up that noxious emissions from the back end of the car. So what Jonathan's asking about though is, what are the alternatives to those things? There's a handful of alternatives out there. The one everybody knows about is just electric cars, right? Where you don't have an internal combustion engine at all. But there's also alternative fuels that you can burn.
Can I ask one potentially kind of dumb question real quick?
I mean, I guess.
Is there a difference between an engine and a motor? I think there is a difference. I just need it clarified.
Yeah, typically you would refer to an engine as being something that burns fuel of some sort versus an electric motor.
So a motor, it still produces a rotational.
Right. So it's producing rotation via an input energy, but it's generally it's an electric motor, so it's running on electricity to create that rotational motion.
An internal combustion engine is a motor, but an electric motor is not an engine.
Yeah, there's probably some square circles type or square rectangle type stuff going on.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure I had the general idea of that clear. Thank you.
Yeah. So there are other fuels that you can burn in an internal combustion engine in your car. The most popular one is probably E85 ethanol. Back in like the early mid 2000s, there was a big push towards ethanol, which is a mix of ethanol, which is derived from corn or sugar or some grasses to create that alcohol. And you mix that with gasoline and like a 50 to 80% mix to create what they call E85 ethanol, which you can just pump from a regular gas pump into your car if it's certified for use of E85. And the advantage there is that, one, you're using less actual fossil fuel because it's mostly plant-based. And also they burn a little bit cleaner than gasoline does or diesel does. Downside being that it is still at least partially fossil fuel, and the energy density of ethanol is around a third less than gasoline or diesel. So you end up getting like pretty poor mileage, fuel economy when you're using ethanol because there's not as much energy per gallon. So your fuel economy actually goes down when you're using ethanol.
That has to do with like the number of carbon bonds in the molecule, I think.
I assume something like that. Yeah, there's just
hydrocarbons are a bunch of carbons strung together, mostly filled out with hydrogen around them. And it's the energy from those bonds that's being released when it gets burnt or combusted. And so something like ethanol doesn't have a ton of carbon bonds in there, so there's not as much energy available to release, if I understand the chemistry correctly.
Okay. So yeah, so you're going to get worse fuel economy when you're using E85, but it's still a net positive on greenhouse gas emissions. So there's still a benefit there. And you don't have to import foreign oil to make the gasoline, or at least you don't have to make as much gasoline because you're not using as much. There's also biodiesels, which can be made from like recycled vegetable oil or animal fat from grease from cooking and stuff. You can recycle those waste oils into diesel fuel and burn them in a car. So that saves, using actual petroleum-based diesel, and it does burn a little bit cleaner than regular diesel. Plus it's, like biodegradable and stuff because it's based on organic matter. And then you've also got some gas some gaseous fuels. So as opposed to liquid fuels, there's natural gas or methane that we can get from the ground, and propane. Propane you'll also see referred to as liquid petroleum gas, LPG, sometimes. Both of those burn cleaner than gasoline or diesel fuel. The problem with those being that, one, they're still fossil fuels, but two, the energy density you can get into a tank isn't as great as a liquid fuel. So you have to, in order to store enough gas on board your car to go anywhere, you have to have a very, very high pressure tank, and they get big if you want to get any range out of them. So typically a natural gas or propane car will have a fairly limited range, and also there aren't that many stations for refueling them. If you have natural gas at your house for like your heater and stuff, you can sometimes get a filling station for your garage to fill your car at home. But if you don't have that, you're gonna have to rely on public stations, and there just aren't that many of them. And then the last one is hydrogen. So hydrogen is interesting because you can either run hydrogen in an internal combustion engine like gasoline by just pumping it into the engine, and it'll burn just like liquid fuel. General Motors actually made a Hummer H2 that ran an internal combustion hydrogen engine.
Did they do that just for the pun in the name?
Probably.
Jerks.
Or at least that was probably part of it.
Oh, the
Hummer
humanity, Joe.
But you can also run hydrogen into a hydrogen fuel cell to create electricity to run an electric motor. So you can do either one with hydrogen, which is kind of neat. And the good thing about hydrogen is that the emissions are basically just water. So I guess you can get some NOx if you burn it, but if you're running it through a fuel cell, you'll get just kind of water coming out the back as it recombines with oxygen.
Typical hydrogen.
Yep. The problem with hydrogen, though, is that our main way of getting hydrogen is cracking methane to generate hydrogen. So, even though you're burning a, quote, clean fuel, it comes from natural gas, which is still a fossil fuel. You can get hydrogen by cracking water into hydrogen and oxygen, but it takes a lot of electricity. So what we need to do is get to a point where we've got enough renewable electricity generation from solar, wind, hydro, etc., that we can break water into hydrogen for use in transportation before it'll really be a truly clean source of fuel. And then, the final thing is battery powers. Vehicles, just battery electric vehicles, which are pretty much the cleanest of all your options. A common talking point on, let's say, less scientifically inclined news outlets is that...
Name names, Joe.
Fox News.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyway.
I mean, well, let's be fair. None of the news outlets are that scientifically inclined.
No, they're not.
That's why I don't watch the news.
But there are some news outlets that are scientifically antagonistic, which is, yes. I'd rather be ignored than targeted.
That's fair. And so this is something that a lot of news outlets get wrong, and it's disseminated its way into the public's mind, is that, well, you got an electric car, but your local power plant is coal-fired, so it's worse than my gasoline car. And that's not true for anywhere in the United States.
That's letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, right?
Yeah. So I'll look up the study that did it, and we'll post it in the show notes. But there's a website that has a map that will tell you, based on where you live, how many miles per gallon a gasoline powered car would have to get to be better than a battery electric car in your location being charged off of your local power generation source. So, in somewhere like California, where we've got lots of renewable energy, you would need to get, over 100 miles per gallon, an equivalent gasoline car, to be better than an electric car. But even in places where it's heavily coal dependent, you're still talking about needing to be in the 50 mile per gallon plus range, which certainly some cars knock on, but most people in those places don't drive Priuses, I would hazard to guess. So it's pretty much a completely false statement that makes its way around. So if you want to do the best you can for the environment, a battery electric vehicle is still pretty much the way to go.
I don't know about you, but I bike around.
I'm
just better than
that's
you.
Fair. That's fair.
And I live in a place that's more amenable to biking, both in terms of distances I typically have to travel and temperature.
Yeah, and traffic. Well, I guess, yeah.
No, the traffic's the thing that's going to kill me.
Yeah, but the traffic speed is much lower than where I live.
Yeah, but the chance of getting doored is much higher.
That's fair. That's fair.
Trust me.
So anyway, hopefully that answers Jonathan's question.
Yeah.
Just kind of a rundown of all the alternative fuels out there.
Jonathan, you don't have to give us your phone number. We get it when you call into our voicemail line, and I had to bleep it because we don't want people calling you. But I enjoyed that you told us. Thanks. It was a very polite, very formal voicemail, Jonathan. So, Joe, I know you kind of said your preference in terms of, like, what's a better thing to do, but what's your ideal? What would be, like, the best world for fuel and for getting us around in our zippy little cars?
Hydrogen fuel cells hold a lot of promise, but they're kind of like Dippin' Dots. They're the car of tomorrow, always.
I hated Dippin' Dots. I always hated Dippin' Dots. I never saw the point because you're getting these little spheres, and so volumetrically you're getting less ice cream per order than you would get if you just went to old-fashioned, churned ice cream. Always hated Dippin' Dots.
That's fair.
Fight me, Dippin' Dots people.
I will always get Dippin' Dots at a baseball game.
I thought they were out of business. I didn't think it existed anymore.
No, man. The local minor league stadium here still sells them.
Not a fan.
Anyway, so I drive which is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle.
I'm gonna bleep the name of the car. They're not a sponsor. Get a sponsor. Get a sponsorship, Joe, and then you can name your car.
All right. I drive a plug-in hybrid, so it
rhymes with heavy jolt.
Yeah, Jolt Cola. So it'll go, at like 50 miles on electricity, which is more than enough for my daily commute. But if I need to go somewhere further, it has a gasoline engine, which will fire up and run the car for as long as I need it to. So it'll take me on a road trip as far as I need it to, which makes for a pretty good compromise for the available technology right now. But battery electric vehicles are getting better. The problem they have right now is charging infrastructure. Tesla has gone about trying to fix that with the superchargers, but they've made those proprietary, so only Teslas can charge there, which isn't super great for getting everybody over to electricity. But I think ultimately that's where the world will end up going, is just battery electric vehicles. The oil and gas companies would of course love to have it be hydrogen because they can sell that at a pump.
Right.
I mean, they can sell electricity at a charging station, but it's a different kind of infrastructure that you really need to build, because the charge times are a little bit longer than filling a gas tank. That said, I imagine that we will continue to reduce the charging times required to charge electric vehicles, such that they just kind of take over.
Cool.
I'm kind of hoping that we take roads and turn them to bike roads.
That
two birds in one stone.
Unless you're crossing Texas, or
yeah,
long
Texas
distance.
is kind of its own thing anyway.
I mean, I would like just fewer roads in general and decrease forest fragmentation to help animals get around, but that's my hippy-dippy worldview.
See episode on wildlife bridges.
They're great.
I know, right?
Hippin' and dippin'.
But
all right.
Think about the decrease in obesity if we all had to ride our bikes.
That's true.
Just like old times.
My penny farthing.
Yeah.
Do penny farthings have brakes, Abe? I want to figure that out.
I don't think so.
I don't think they did either.
Some do.
I think you just put your feet down Flintstone style, right?
It depends on the model.
All right. Well, that'll be our
modern penny farthing can come with brakes.
Joe, next time you're in town, let's see if we can find a place that rents penny farthings. I know we don't live in Brooklyn, but I'm sure there's a place that's hipster enough to get us on a penny farthing. There's some museum we can break into and take one around for a spin around the mall. So
I know if we all go to Denver,
Museum has one.
There's a bike shop in Denver that has two.
Okay. Well, we're less likely to be in Denver than all of us are likely to be here in the DMV. So a quest is born. You have a new side quest to clog up your inventory before you go on the main quest to battle the actual boss. Okay. Abe doesn't play enough video games to know what I'm talking about, Joe. Nope. You get it.
I played Mario.
That's not the type of video game I'm talking about.
There's no side quest in Mario.
This is a Skyrim Fallout scenario. Okay, Joe, I know Baja SE coming up, but will probably be already happened by the time this episode comes out, I'm guessing?
The last one is end of May. Okay. So, maybe?
Hopefully it went great. Or is going...
Yeah!
Woo!
Abe, you got anything to plug?
Not anything major.
Okay. I've been on a few recent iFanboy episodes. I talked about Infinity War with them, a spoilerific discussion where I included my predictions for what I think is going to happen in the next Avengers film, and then we just covered a anime film called Batman Ninja that had a theatrical release in Japan but went straight to video here in the US, and it is bonkers. So Batman and his family of all the Robins and Catwoman and Alfred get sent back to feudal Japan, and everything is like redesigned for like feudal Japan stuff, and there's a Bat Clan that thinks he's a god, and it's amazing. It's just, it's bonkers McGee. Nice. So you can check out that show on the iFanboy feed, and I got an episode of Understanding Comics. Guys, been talking about comic books a lot lately, and it's great. But I'm glad to be talking about science with you guys. It was really fun to do just like an old-fashioned kind of episode. We've been doing a lot of interviews lately, but it was nice to just have one of us.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining me, fellas.
Of course.
And thank you for joining us, listeners. We will be back next time with a whole lot more science.
Sort of.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolobe Media Network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
All right, I'm back.
So yeah.
Wow. Ryan, we have to throw you back in the volcano. That's what we were discussing.
That is definitely not a way I want to die.
No.
So, kill me first, please.
Two birds and one stone.
Yeah.
Two birds and one volcano?
I feel like just throwing you into the volcano will accomplish killing you, so...
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I don't want to die by volcano.
Right. I'm not sure I feel like giving you that option.
Well, guess because I'm not a kid in Asia.
Right.
Euthanasia.
Yes, I got it.